lovely Susan Joyce. So Susan, if you want to come off mute and start to share your slides. So Susan joins us from the beautiful Vancouver Island. And whilst Tobias shared with us some of the insights on the environmental sides of ESG, Susan will be sharing with us what does the S actually mean within the ESG side of things. So Susan, just while you are sharing those slides, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the wonderful Susan Joyce. Thank you very much. Off you go, Susan.
Appreciate that, Sarah, and good afternoon, good morning to everybody, depending on where you are. Tobias really did set the scene and touch on such a broad range of issues, and it's wonderful to hear that comprehensive a start. What I'm going to do is look a little bit more at sort of demythologizing the social side, and looking at what I think is fundamental to managing it, which is keeping it solidly grounded in an understanding of what has to be managed to manage social risk in ESG. And to start off, so I'm Susan Joyce. I am president of Uncommon Ground Consultants, a specialist social performance consulting company based here in Vancouver, but I'm speaking today on behalf of the Social Practice Forum, which is a collaborative of 65 social performance experts, social practice experts who have come together to create a forum in which we can really push forward the practice, social performance, and look at professionalizing it, improving an understanding of what's involved, and really move the bar in terms of what is the integration of social performance within industry, within business, as a key to effectively managing these issues. The forum works collaboratively. We pool, extensive years, decades of expertise that have come together to collectively work on the belief that business, civil society, communities, and government can transform natural resource endowments to create enduring and positive social, environmental, and economic outcomes. And what have been over the last 3 decades as we've worked on this, what are some of the barriers that we need to overcome to move to doing this effectively? So I'm speaking today for the Social Practice Forum. And the social as a component of ESG is perhaps it has not had the visibility until, say, the last couple of years that it's beginning to receive today, but it's also it's extremely broad. It covers a wide range of issues, and it tends to be much less understood. So we're going to talk a little bit about putting some substance to that. And one of the ways that we see this is some, at times, very strange understandings of what the S actually stands for in ESG. And if you do, we've done several extensive benchmarking studies and looking at how different companies are using the term social, or using the term ESG on their websites, and how it's being talked about online by different pundits. And there's a wide range of understanding of what it means. I'm going to get us to focus through this talk on what I consider to be the critical tool for effectively managing social risk, and that is a social performance approach and an increasingly professionalized and skilled application by experts, by professionals of what the social performance means. So the state of play is that there's an incredible range in the maturity of how organizations and companies address or understand ESG, from very sophisticated, well-developed approaches by equator banks that have been dealing with this for several decades at this point, and mining companies that have taken this on seriously and integrated it, to the incredible range of ways in which ESG is being talked about by companies that have come newly to it and that don't necessarily understand or embrace the core issues that have to be addressed. Now, there's been a huge explosion in the use of the term, and in particular around ESG investing. And the focus of ESG investing is really about disclosure and accountability. And it's an incredibly important driver that is, I think, reminding many mining companies and other actors of some of the commitments that were first made in the in the late 1990s as part of the Global Mining Initiative. And there was a big move toward more responsible performance. And then there was a slipping back through a lot of the work in the last years or so as leadership changed and commitments shifted. So this new investor focus, I think, is very constructive and helping to refocus the issue, but it does have a perverse outcome. Because of the focus on reporting, on disclosure and accountability, I'm seeing, and my colleagues as well, we're seeing an increasing number of companies that are jumping on the bandwagon around ESG, but all they're thinking about is, how do I collect the data? How do I report out? How do I show that I'm doing this, that I'm addressing ESG? And the focus is not on the doing, it's on the showing, which we know to be problematic. So what is it that we need to show, and across such a diverse range of issues, such as what the social issues covered in ESG? But it's important to ground that term in the fundamentals, and I'm just going to turn to that in a minute. I want to call attention to one particular issue that I think really needs to be taken seriously, and that is the tendency to see social to be about relationship issues, to be about the process of engagement, to be all about my relationship with my customers, communities, and suppliers. And there's a quote here, and I'll be very direct. It's not cited because I disagree with it, but it was at a fairly respectable website, saying that there are many separate social aspects of ESG, but all of them are essentially about social relationships. And the key point about my talk is that it's not about social relationships. It's about managing social impacts and social benefits, which in fact is what gives you good or bad social relationships. So the fundamentals need to be addressed, which is managing the risks and managing the issues. So what we see today, certainly in much of the online discussion, not necessarily what the serious companies are doing, is we see this focus on the upside. This is the relationship side. This is where we get to give positive benefits to different actors, community benefits, to attract and retain the best employees, societal contributions. And including among this, of course, is an increasing focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, on gender equity. All of these things are extremely positive, but these tend to be framed as contributions, as the upside that companies are contributing to. And the whole concept of social responsibility tends to focus on this issue of societal contributions and community benefits. And this is really where companies are seeing or articulating the social in ESG. But the critical issue and the basis on which strong relationships are built and effective management is integrated into the company is not in how you distribute benefits. It's managing the fundamentals. And as we will see, with the increasing focus on human rights, as Tobias mentioned, the EU is moving toward hard law around requiring human rights due diligence. What that has helped us do is to keep the focus on not just the risk to the business, which we often see managing ESG as managing the risk to the business, which it is necessarily. But the human rights focus fundamentally says managing risks to people and to the environment, and to people through environmental impacts. And it's also pushed a focus on, rather than the traditional practice, which is going ahead with developments and minimizing the negative impacts that come out of it through a series of measures. That's kind of the environmental regulatory model, is really saying, impacts, negative impacts in particular to rights, need to be avoided. And so it's applying what we call the mitigation hierarchy. And you move first to avoid these impacts rather than mitigating them. And if you cannot mitigate them, then there's a decision whether you need to move ahead. And then there's mitigation and the actions that come from that. So this whole foundational piece, which is the basis on which good relationships are built with these different stakeholders, this is often very invisible in at least the online discussions and much of the way that ESG is articulated and framed today, and is fundamental. So not to belabor this issue, but social, like environmental, is rooted in a series of very strong international standards that have been expanding and added to over the last couple of decades, starting with the IFC performance standards, which grew out of an earlier World Bank's social and environmental safeguard policies. So in terms of on the ground effects, this trajectory is fairly long and has led up to where we are today, and increasingly strengthened by the integration of human rights due diligence, by the endorsement of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, which keeps the focus, as I said, on avoiding doing harm and respecting rights. So how do we do this? We do this, and we increasingly move into a sphere where the management of social issues is not a mystical, subjective, unmeasurable quagmire, but is in fact science and science-based and fact-driven, and there's the increasingly professionalized field of social performance, which as a group, the Social Practice Forum is committed to advancing. With the application of a social performance approach, you develop and you ensure that you have the expertise needed to address the critical issues. And social performance brings the optic of having measurable outcomes and a focus on impacts, so we're moving away from what has traditionally been the easy piece, which is to show that we're doing something being better than nothing, moving toward what is measurable outcomes and what's the real impact. And this is where social impact measurement and the use of effective indicators are all very important. And on the basis of these measurable outcomes and impacts, then we report out, then we say what we're doing, then we show the wider world what we're doing. The social performance approach is also increasingly able to support well-defined ESG criteria. And there's some really important work, which Sarah has alluded to, and hopefully will be present in the conference, of moving toward a stronger and better definition of, in particular, the social criteria that need to be managed, and aligning that across the different organizations that are currently working to measure and report on criteria. But the social performance practice, the social performance optic, is also critical for the set of skills and expertise that it brings to actually reach out and effectively measure and understand the relationships with key stakeholder groups, all of which are important. And these need to be not just a focus of influencing the relationship, but of feeding into and informing the management of social performance, the management of social issues, and even the identification of what are the key risks, what are the key human rights vulnerabilities of the populations that may be affected by a project. So I know it's a very short period of time. Embedding social performance, clarifying the scope of what needs to be addressed by social performance, and moving it increasingly into a science-based, ensuring that you have the technical expertise that you need. You'll all be able to go back and read these bullets after the fact. But social performance is an increasingly mature and developed area of expertise. And there are many, many aspects of social management that are pretty well codified and understood. The Social Practice Forum is in the process of developing a series of papers which will soon become public, to provide guidance to social performance practitioners and to those who want to understand to develop a department of social performance in your company. And it will help, we believe, to consolidate the practice, but also to show the extent to which it needs to be an integrated part of companies for effectively delivering on the ESG commitments. So this is a link to the Social Practice Forum, and will allow you access to these papers, which should be out in the next couple of weeks. Thanks.
Brilliant. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Susan. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together from the other side of those muted microphones for the fabulous Susan Joyce. Now, Susan, we've got a couple of questions that have been coming in. I've got a whole list of questions here, but again, we are constrained by time, unfortunately. So John Clark asks, he says, okay, so there's some fantastic guidance that's coming out at the moment, be it globally, internationally, or be it by region, such as British Columbia. Do we think that the guidance documents themselves and the publication of them actually shows us that there is significant progress, or what else is needed to really accelerate that process with regards to getting social performance to mean something?
I think the most important issue is the integration of social performance into the operational side of business. What we see are so many situations in which it's ghettoized, it's in a silo, it's not an integrated part. Less so than in the past, but it's still not fully understood the extent to which the information being collected by trained professionals in the field about risks and impacts, about vulnerabilities, about exposure to hazard, these need to be integrated into decision-making from early on. And so many opportunities are missed to do this. And, you know, for example, the global industry standard on tailings management, which I'm following quite closely. It is written for a deeply integrated approach between the collection of this baseline information and decision-making at the company level from the earliest point on. Now, it's not necessarily rolling out that way yet. It has to mature. But this is the aspirational side of looking for this deeply integrated function of social performance that is influencing decision-making and is influenced by, it also understands the industry intimately, the business intimately, and the sites intimately, and the kind of decisions that have to be made. So it's got to be a two-directional or multi-directional flow as well. But that integration, I think, is critical, more so than even the guidance.
Susan, I think it's almost as if you've read John's next question, which is all about the global tailings guidance that's out there, but I won't ask you that question because I know you can answer it offline. One final question though, before we pass to our next lovely speaker, and this is from Paul, and he says, do you think that this approach is still constrained by do less harm rather than actually looking for opportunity, or where do you think this is in terms of working with communities, etc.? Is it about looking for opportunities, or is it more about doing less harm?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think that there has been a lot that has there's been a lot that's pushed toward looking at benefits, but it is, to be honest, in the mining sector, it's too often about dropping financial boons on communities, on regions, because, you know, you want to catch the next commodity cycle. You don't want to be delayed by social conflict. And this so this focus on, oh, it's going to be so good, without truly seeding that in an analysis of what are the challenges and limitations to sustainable development in that area, and how that has to be scaled up and built in and developed over a period of time. So I think both with the focus on human rights, which gets a much solider attention to avoiding the negative impacts, and the long-term perspective for sustainable development that is beginning to be talked about. I think these two things will balance out that tension a bit more, but it's still a tension.
Brilliant. Well, I guess so long as I acknowledge it as being a tension rather than trying to ignore it, that's a good start, isn't it? So brilliant. Thank you so much, Susan. There are so many more questions that we could ask you now, but that was a fabulous introduction in a way to what do we mean by the social side of this compared to the more environmental side. So thank you very much, Susan. Round of applause for